Hello and welcome back to this downful idealistic crusade. This video will go over the titles I picked up in Kino Lorber's latest site sale they had, which was called their Winter Wonderland sale. They, of course, have many sales throughout the year and have their ongoing going out of print sale. And combined with their free shipping threshold once you hit $50 and their mixing in of brand new titles along with old titles, it's just an absolute must to at least chip away at some titles you need in these sales they do. Also, because, of course, Kino Lorber releases dozens of titles per month. It's practically impossible to keep up with all the stuff they do. And again, they mixed in new titles and some titles from the Cohen film group as well. So those, in particular, were at a significant savings and included brand new releases. So got a nice stack of titles that I am so excited to dig into. And if push comes to shove, I'm still making my best of the year 2021 list. And if I had to choose what is probably going to be possibly the best Kino release of the year, this is a contender along with their Hunchback of Notre Dame. But they did a reissue of the masterpiece Western Veracruz, directed by Robert Aldrich. This is one of the landmark westerns of the 50s. Shows an emerging darkness in the western and pairs together Gary Cooper with Burt Lancaster. This was also a hugely influential film on Sergio Leone. When you see this film for the first time, if you're a big Leone nerd like I am, you will be inundated with all these little things that you recognize, right down to the fact that Lancaster's character has very grungy looking makeup. He's dressed in all black and a black hat, and he's been described as looking like a grinning Satan, and has these gleaming white teeth. And of course you see just his whole general look and you can't help but think of the Henry Fonda character of Frank and Once Upon a Time in the West. He's dressed exactly the same. It's a direct reference to Veracruz. And Leone was fascinated by the pairing of the elder statesman Cooper with the younger, brasher, more violent Lancaster in this film, and mirrors it directly in For a Few Dollars More between the Man with No Name, or Manco as he's named in that film, and the Lee Van Cleef character of Colonel Mortimer. And it's also a really interesting later career performance from Cooper with a greater sense of the world and a character with a past and an internal darkness that Cooper was not doing all the time. So I know it's kind of an acquired taste for some. I think it's a classic landmark Western. I absolutely adore it. It gets very dark and brash in all the right places. It is very much befitting of a Robert Aldrich directed picture. This was also the first major film to be released in the then new Super Scope process, and because it was shot and designed for it, it looks beautiful. Not every film was designed for Super Scope. And most infamously, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the Don Siegel classic, was hit with Super Scope after the fact, and that's why that looks so distorted, unfortunately. This is also got a slipcase, as Kino does with their first prints. I don't know if the slipcase is sold out by now, if you're one of those people who really loves slipcases. I didn't know if I would get one, so it was a nice surprise when I did. Again, this is a reissue because this was done by MGM. They did basically they did a cleanup job for the DVD, and then they released a bare bones Blu-ray, and that went out of print before I could get a copy. But I have to say I was never a fan of how that version looked. It looked like it was almost drained of color. So every time I watch the film, I've had to pull out my old Laserdisc because that's just the version I have, and that has a lot more color, and the transfer is pretty solid for LD, and it's got a nice sounding mono track. Well, this, again, brand new scan, same matching art on the case, but this has all that wonderful color intact. So this is a night and day difference over the old MGM Master. And it's not labeled as a special edition, but it is one of Kino's releases with more extras, and it has this lovely reversible original art on both sides. I think both covers look beautiful, but that's just really bold and striking. But it's great art either way you go. In terms of the extras, it includes a commentary by the great Alex Cox. It's got the Trailers from Hell piece with John Landis, and of course, if you've ever been on the Trailers from Hell website or seen any of their pieces on Kino releases or other labels discs, you'll know that those are far better than you'd think they'd be, and especially when they get somebody who's really a big fan of the film, or one of the notable names who does a lot of the Trailers from Hell pieces. So it's nice having that on disc as well. I wish this was a full-blown special edition in terms of, having a boatload of extras, because this is a landmark classic Western of the 50s. It was wildly popular, although not so much in Mexico. It made it a lot harder to produce Westerns in Mexico in the years to come, particularly on the Magnificent Seven, for example, because the Mexican people and the Mexican government felt the way the scenes of the revolution were handled in this film kind of didn't paint them in the best light, which is understandable. But it's still a blistering film, and really the first major modern U.S. film at this time to be shot on location in Mexico in color with a significant budget, and that really adds to the just the reality factor, because again, this is not completely studio bound like most Westerns would still be at this budget and in color, and you have Robert Aldrich, so it has this real nasty punch to it, and that's what I think makes this really all the more special. So I'm so happy that Veracruz now finally has a truly good Blu-ray with a truly good transfer. The only problem is you try to get the slipcase back on and it keeps hitting the plastic of the Blu-ray case, and then you go, why do we have slipcases? But they look cool, man. It doesn't say so on the packaging, but if I recall correctly, this was a brand new 2K scan. Again, I've seen pieces of, I've seen the old Blu-ray, I just never owned it, and I've seen the old DVD that master originated from. I just thought that never looked very good, so it's really amazing to see this finally have that wonderful color back. Now, on the flip side of things, we have another Robert Aldrich Western starring Burt Lancaster. Very dark, very gritty, hugely underrated. But unfortunately, on the opposite side of things, this has a pretty craptastic transfer. It's a very old master, but this is really the only Blu-ray out there. It's basically a port of the one that came out in Europe first, but it does add some extras and does have a commentary. So it was on sale, and apparently nobody else is going to ever put this out. So I finally bit the bullet and bought the Kino release of Ozanas Raid, which is one of the great Westerns of the 70s. Hardly anybody knows it outside of genre circles, but it is a blistering, dark, gritty, very realistic Western. It kind of just came and went on its original release, but I do highly recommend it if you're a fan of Lancaster or Aldrich or great Westerns in general. The way that it deals with the relations and the violence that erupts between the U.S. cavalry forces, the Apaches, and the Indian scouters and old Indian fighters, in terms of the actual characters who are going in between the two factions, essentially, is really fascinating. Very well done. And it's all about morally gray areas, and it does not pull any punches. I wish it was a better known film, and I wish it hadn't taken so long to at least get a version of the film in widescreen. I have the old Laserdisc release, but that's a 133 transfer. It's not widescreen at all, and that was pretty much the best you could do for the longest time. I think there's a DVD version floating around from Universal, like a Vault, one of their Vault series MOD discs, and I think that's where this transfer originates from. Again, this did come out in Europe first on Blu-ray, and it was not a very good master, and then this seems to be the exact same thing, but it does add a few extras. There's a commentary by Nick Pinkerton. There's a really nice piece. They got Bruce Davison to sit down and do an interview because he co-starred in the film. And then, of course, it includes the trailer and the Trailers from Hell trailer, which I've already seen on their website, but it's cool to actually have on disc. I wish the transfer was better. This also really deserves a special edition, or at least a 2-disc affair, because there are 2 versions of the film. If you're a fan of this film, you're probably already aware, but for those who aren't, Burt Lancaster and Robert Aldrich had made a number of films together, and really Aldrich was one of the best directors in terms of getting great performances out of Lancaster on the screen. However, in the making of this film, they had some disagreements, and Lancaster had some power in the production process, so there are actually 2 different edits of the film. One is the primary version, edited, the editing being supervised by Aldrich himself. That's what's on here, and that's what's on almost every version. Lancaster supervised a version of the editing, and that's the secondary version. And if I'm remembering it correctly, The Lancaster edited version was released overseas, whereas the Aldrich supervised version was released here in the U.S. and other territories. And or I may be flipping that. I can't remember. I can never remember which. But basically, one version went to most of the world, and the other version played everywhere else. And so on the European release, apparently it includes a DVD copy. Unfortunately, in the PAL standard, because it is a foreign release, but of the Burt Lancaster cut, or the Burt Lancaster supervised edit of the film. And that, unfortunately, is not included here or on any U.S. release that I'm aware of. It's not a wildly different version of the film as far as I understand it. I've never been able to actually see it, but I've read some descriptions about it. It's just basically some different scenes, and some things are changed around slightly, and I think some scene order is revised a little bit. But I think it would be proper to have both versions presented with maybe some more extras from some Western aficionados and Western film critics. But in any case, this is one of the great westerns of the 70s, and they're really, to be honest, there aren't a whole lot, because after this point, the western genre really had gone past the point of no return and would never come back to prominence. So for me, this is one of the last truly great westerns. An unflinching look at the relations between U.S. forces and Native American tribes. It is one of the great westerns about that particular topic, because it doesn't pull any punches, and it is a brutally dark film in tone, which makes me love it all the more, that it doesn't sugarcoat anything, and that is Ozanas Raid. Next is a western from John Sturges. This is one I've always read about, but I've never gotten to actually see in its entirety. That is the 1956 western Backlash with Richard Widmark and the great Donna Reed. Really happy this was included in the sale. There's not really a lot of reviews about it in terms of disc reviews, but I do believe this is a slightly newer transfer, and it does have a Sam Deegan audio commentary. So again, it's not a Kino special edition, but it's at least got a commentary plus the original trailer, and this is just a classic western I've meant to see for ages. I do have a great affinity for most John Sturges films, particularly the earlier ones that aren't quite as long and slow, shall we say, but this has just been on my watch list for way too long. I can't believe this one is so cheap. This is technically, I guess you could call it a special edition. It's one of the classic westerns. Even if you don't like it all that much, its showmanship and scope and scale and importance and color photography, it's just one of those iconic westerns. And so I'm very happy that Kino did a Blu-ray presentation of the roadshow version of Duel in the Sun, directed by King Vidor, and of course produced by the legendary David O. Selznick, and of course arguably just primarily as a vehicle for Jennifer Jones, but it is one of the iconic westerns, and wonderfully presented here on this Blu-ray release from Kino. Again, this is the roadshow version of the film, so it is the complete version with the overture and the exit music and the prelude music or the interactive music. And of course, it does have the reversible cover art, which I always do appreciate. This one, I guess, is sort of a more 60s revisionist western type approach to the art. Show you the rear. And again, I do count this as a special edition from Kino because it does have a number of extras. So in addition to actually presenting the full roadshow version of the film, which was much more difficult to come by on previous releases, it includes a commentary plus an interview with Gregory Peck's surviving family members and a trailer gallery. So this is a must-own disc from Kino. It's the best version of the film we've ever gotten on disc so far. And again, it's the entire roadshow version of the film. So, and it was so dirt cheap that I couldn't believe it. So if you get the chance to, this is one of the must-own Kino Lorber discs. Now, these next three titles I kind of grouped together simply because I always think of them linked together. One is not a Western, but it has many Western elements, and they are all three starring the legendary Jimmy Stewart. And the first is one of the outlier films in his collaboration with the great Anthony Mann. Again, this is not technically a Western, but it has many of the same elements from their Westerns and is part of their legendary collaboration. It's a film that doesn't get talked about very much, and honestly, it's a hell of a lot better than you'd think it would be. Every time I go into it, I always am flabbergasted at how much other stuff is in there and how much drama they get out of the scenario. So in a lot of ways, it does feel like one of their westerns, but buried in a story in a 50s film about oil drilling in the bayou. That's, of course, Thunder Bay. Again, I think all the films they made together are great, from the Glenn Miller story to Thunder Bay to, I mean, even Strategic Air Command has stuff in it that is worthwhile. But I was pleased that Kino did a Blu-ray. This is a title I never thought would get a Blu-ray release. It does improve over the old DVD in a number of ways, and includes a Toby Roan audio commentary, which is really nice. The only thing with this film, this was made at the transition of the widescreen era, so there is some debate on how this should have been presented. I can never remember 100% for sure if this was one of the films that was shot Academy ratio and then was matted by the studio. I think this was at that crossover point where the mandate was make everything in widescreen. So it works both ways. I do wish on this particular title that they had presented both ratios. Older releases are in 4:3 for the most part, and then more modern ones are in 1:8:5. This one is in 1:8:5, but I do wish they had presented the Academy ratio version as well. Also, this did have a multi-track stereo soundtrack, at least. I believe it was simply 3.0, so left, center, right. It was early stereo and early widescreen for Universal, because it was released in 1953. So it's right there in that transitional period. And all these films from the early 50s, you do have to do some research and try to make sure, you know, okay, what ratio was it released in? What ratio was it shot in? Did it have a different soundtrack when it came out? So this film does technically have two different soundtracks. It has a stereo soundtrack with just like the tiniest bits of dialogue panning, and of course a mono soundtrack. The old DVD did have a 3.0 mix on it. I'm not sure what this has in particular. I would think it has the same. I just haven't got to throw it on yet because I literally just got these in the mail. But I will, of course, be doing a full review on all of these when time permits. But I'm just very happy that one of the underrated Man Stewart films that isn't a Western has at least gotten a solid Blu-ray release. Next, from 1957, this is important to discuss in the Man-Stewart relationship because this was the film that partnership broke up on. It's never been 100% detailed why this happened, but it's generally assumed that Stewart wanted to do some lighter fare and didn't want to do as completely as dark of a film of the type that he and Mann had been making. So this started out as another Western based on a story by Borden Chase, directed by Mann, starring Stewart, but it kind of fell apart and Mann left. So you can see some of the hallmarks of the Mann-Stewart Westerns, and it does have a lot of that darkness, but unfortunately, it never really comes together. Nothing ever quite gels, and there are some very out-of-place, lighter moments, the most infamous being when Jimmy gets to bust out his favorite accordion and play us a tune while riding on the top of a train, and that really does not fit at all. It's also more of a star vehicle for Audie Murphy. It is one of his better Westerns, but it's interesting to notice all of the things we associate with the Anthony Mann films in here, but it's like it doesn't have that same conviction and that drive and that heart. So it's unfortunately forever going to be a compromise film, but there's still good stuff in it, and it's a must for fans of the Mann-Stewart Westerns. That's, of course, 1957's Night Passage. This was also, I believe it was just about the first film shot and released in the new Technorama process, which resulted in really exceptional image clarity in a widescreen image. It is slightly related to VistaVision in terms of how the film was mounted in the camera, and eventually they came up with a large format 70mm version, which was used on films like Spartacus. So this is a brand new transfer. A lot of the reviews rave about how good this looks, but apparently there might be a little touch of DNR here and there. I'm not entirely sure because, again, I'm just now getting this in the mail, and I've been wanting to get it, but sometimes you just have to wait for things to pop up in a sale before you jump on it. But anyway, this was a new transfer. I think it's exclusive to this Kino release. There were prior European versions that were, I think, based off the DVD master. And it does add a Toblerone audio commentary as well as the trailer. So this is one I've been really excited to look at ever since it came out. It just never got around to it. And again, I do have some fondness for this film, but it is a tough watch being such a big fan of the Anthony Mann films, because you can't help but think, okay, how much better would this have been if Mann had stayed and the script had stayed tough all the way through? Because unfortunately, this film doesn't add up to a whole lot outside of being a standard Western with some darker elements, and you get to see Jimmy play his accordion at one point. So, there you go. And then to see that sort of path come to its logical conclusion, you have the 1966 Western, also starring Stewart, The Rare Breed. This is a completely different type of film. It is almost in ways what you could label a family-friendly Western, because you do have younger aged characters, and it is centering around an actual prize cow, so yeah, it is what it is. It's definitely light tone. It is much more like a television Western in terms of the design, the layout. It's not really ambitious at all. It was not a success and did not get good reviews when it came out. It feels very old-fashioned, but on the other hand, there's nothing quite wrong with it, and it does have a little bit of a charm to it. And being a massive Stewart fan and a big fan of Maureen O'Hara, yeah, I had to see it. And the actual color photography, the color itself is quite nice. So it was nice to see it get a bump to HD. Plus, it does have a commentary from Simon Abrams and the original trailer. So I guess it was a matter of, they were already doing some of these other Stewart outlier films that weren't the Anthony Mann films, and this was in an old box set of Universals on DVD. So it was nice they at least did, all the films, so you can retire that set. Again, this is not really a good film. I got it more for completion's sake, because if I'm going to watch a film like Night Passage after watching all the Mann films, then I usually watch this as well. And again, I kind of like it. You can't help it. It's not a particularly good film, but it's solid, it's okay, and it is a later Stewart film when his career was already starting to really wind down. Next, I've got 3 horror titles from the classic golden age of horror. This one I've really wanted to see for a while. I've never seen the whole film. I've seen clips of it. I know of it. I've read about it in books on classic horror, but I was really excited because it's a brand new 2K master and has a nice commentary. But that is the 1933 film Supernatural, starring Carole Lombard and Randolph Scott. And so I've seen clips of this, and it's just such an enticing idea to see Carole Lombard the image we think of in major stardom in a early horror film, and one produced by the Halpern brothers, who had, of course, just done White Zombie with Bela Lugosi the year before in 1932. So, and of course, that's absolutely gorgeous cover art. Or it's just a standard Kino disc inside, but it is a brand new 2K master and restoration, I presume. Along with that includes the theatrical trailer, and most exciting, Tim Lucas does a commentary. If you've not heard one of his tracks, they are so wonderful to listen to. He does, everything from classics to genre films, but they're always beyond worthwhile in terms of the information and the research that he's done. But they're also really down to earth and very pleasurable to listen to. So anytime I see he's done a commentary, I really go out of my way to try and get that released so I can listen to it. So this will be great to finally see this film in its entirety in a new restoration with the Tim Lucas commentary. Next are 2 films from the classic Universal period. These are not considered part of the Universal Monsters collection, so they don't get boxed together with the main, more famous films. So it was a real surprise to hear they were getting restorations. They did get some, or at least one of them got a MOD Universal DVD-R a number of years ago that was very expensive. And a lot of those films have been released by Shout Factory in their Universal Horror Collection volumes. but some never were, and apparently Kino's picked them up. So they did 2 just recently, and apparently they're chipping away at a few more. This one is a real little gem. It has been reworked and remade several different times, and elements turned up and other things. But that is the 1933 classic, The Secret of the Blue Room. This is right from the early main period of the golden age of horror and the early period of Universal horror films, being produced in 1933. Kino's used the original poster art here, and it's just, I'm amazed this is finally on Blu-ray. I'm so happy and pleased that it is, because I never owned that DVD-R. I've seen it on TCM, I think, once before, and I've seen it in another version that was really crummy, but it does include a new commentary by Michael Schlesinger and includes a trailer gallery as well. But this is one of the really important and really well done Universal chillers from their early days of horror films, and really nice to have it on Blu-ray since it's nowhere near as well known as the more famous monster titles. The other is not technically a horror film. I guess you could say maybe it has... it definitely has some sort of gothic element. It is based on the final unfinished novel by Charles Dickens, so that means, of course, they had to come up with an ending for the story. That's 1935's The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Again, it's not technically a horror film, but it slots right in with the other Universal horror films being produced in terms of the time it was made, its style, its direction, its cast and crew are a lot of people who are associated with the classic horror films. And of course, you've got Claude Rains playing in a Charles Dickens adaptation, which means, it has to be great, again, simply because Claude Rains is in it. Really love the original poster art they went with here. Of course, it's just a standard Kino disc inside. What's nice is they do include some extras. David Del Valle does an audio commentary and includes some trailers as well. This is a real welcome surprise because it is definitely just about the most obscure of anything considered Universal horror. It did get a old release in video, but that was only on VHS. It never got a Laserdisc release. It didn't get a regular DVD release. I'm not entirely sure. This may have gotten a MOD DVD release eventually in the Universal Vault series, but I could be misremembering that. I think it possibly finally did, but for the longest time, this was a title you could only see on VHS. It rarely ever appeared on TCM or television. The first time I ever got to see it was this terrible looking version that was floating around. I think it was somebody tried to do a dub or a capture of the VHS tape, and it was just really terrible. There are other terrible versions of this that were floating around from sources I don't know where, and I was never able to get the VHS tape growing up. I knew about it, and I knew it was part of the Universal Horror series on tape, but it always just eluded me, and then when I would try to find it later, there would be like one copy on eBay for some absurd price. So I'm so happy it's finally available on Blu-ray. Love the art, and I can't wait to dig into the commentary as well. Then lastly are the 2 titles from the Cohen Film Collection, and these are actually linked because I try to describe the best way to explain these films and how I group them together. It's not really a genre, but it sort of is. I like to go through and try to see every film that is outside the James Bond series, but that was either worked on, produced, or starring various cast and crew members from the main James Bond series. And most of all, I try to see as many films directed by Terrence Young as I can. I'm a great fan of Terrence Young, and unfortunately, all of his early films are very hard to find or unavailable entirely, especially here in the U.S., and they are very important to the DNA of the Bond series. Feature many of the original cast and crew members. So I've been able to see some, and of course know about many others I've never gotten to see. And this also goes for early films of Guy Hamilton, Lewis Gilbert, Ken Adam, Ted Moore, Richard Maybaum, the whole main cast and crew. Most of all, the 1950s Warwick films produced by Cubby Broccoli and Irving Allen that I really hope come to video someday, particularly films like The Red Beret, which is probably the most important. I think there's a British DVD of that, but it's in PAL, and that's it. But anyway, Cohen announced they were putting out a new restored version of a really important title that I had only seen before in a really terrible version. So I was so excited, and this was included in the sale. This is a brand new title. Of course, unfortunately, the sale's now over, but I'm sure it will be included in later sales. But this is the exceptionally important 1948 film Corridor of Mirrors. This was actually Terrence Young's first feature as a director. It is known also as being the first to literally feature the first film appearance of Christopher Lee. It also is the first time you see the great Lois Maxwell in a film directed by Terrence Young. They were friends, and I can't remember if they met on this film or had already known each other, but she has an interesting appearance here in this film. And again, this is a brand new restoration that I am so excited to finally see. Again, I've seen this film once before, and it was a really terrible version. So I couldn't believe this was announced and a new restoration, and it was going to be done by Cohen, who always has wonderful releases in terms of their encoding and their presentation and such. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this has any extra features, but this was just an unbelievable surprise. So I can't wait to dig into this and look at the new restoration. This is, again, really important, especially for somebody like me who's a Bond nerd and obsessed with Terrence Young and everybody else. And, of course, getting to see Christopher Lee's first film appearance in a beautiful restored version from Cohen is just like, it had my name written all over it. The other and the last title I have to go over is the 1988 Merchant Ivory film that I thought would never come to Blu-ray, also from Cohen, from a new scan. 1988 film The Deceivers, starring Pierce Brosnan, directed by Nicholas Meyer. This film, of course, deals with the British in India and the Thuggee cult. It is really the only other notable film that tries to tackle the topic seriously outside of Hammer's classic The Stranglers of Bombay. It was a very troubled production. There is an entire book about it that I really want to read, and that makes it really unfortunate in a way that there's no extras on this release, because from everything I've read and heard, this film was a really interesting production. Again, there's an entire book just about the making of this film, and so it would have been nice to see at least some talking head pieces. Nicholas Meyer wrote a really well done memoir that also focuses on his entire Hollywood career and his writing work, not just his time in Star Trek. I believe it's called View from the Bridge. But he does talk about the making of The Deceivers in there, and that whetted my appetite to see the film again. It was released on DVD by Criterion. It's a sort of Merchant Ivory special type release for them, but that was long out of print. I don't know, I think that might have had a commentary, if I remember correctly. But anyway, that was hitting absurd prices, and there was no other decent release. So this was a really welcome surprise. It's also got one of Pierce Brosnan's really great performances of his pre-Bond years in films, and this is where he and Nicholas Meyer became friends, and they've done some other things together since. But it's a really well done film. It's not perfect, and I don't think it's 100% as effective as Hammer's Stranglers of Bombay, because I love that film, and that has a real inherent gritty nastiness to it. But you do have to admire the Deceivers for really trying to get that on screen. And again, it's really the only other major motion picture that tries to do the story and the historical period setting correctly, and with attention to trying to get to have accuracy and to get it correct. So I do admire it, and I am very happy it's finally on Blu-ray, and it does again make the perfect double feature pairing with Stranglers of Bombay. But just beyond thrilled this is finally on Blu-ray. Again, this is another title I thought nobody would ever do. So even though it doesn't have any extras, I'm just happy it's finally available again, and you don't have to pay the crazy prices for the old out-of-print Criterion DVD. So that's all I picked up in the sale this time. Got far more than I intended to, because the number of titles they included was just massive. So there was definitely a lot of whittling down as usual, and hoping things would pop up in the next sale they run, because Kino's site does run pretty regular sales, so that is still the best way to chip away at their massive catalog of Blu-ray releases, because trying to buy them as they come out is just impossible because they release so many, and the quality and amount of extras and whether it's a special edition or not just completely varies from title to title, because they do simply so many. But if you picked up anything in the sale, definitely comment down below with your thoughts and what you're excited for and what you're excited to dig into. So, of course, I'll probably be back when Kino does another sale sometime in 2022. As always, thanks ever so much for watching, and keep supporting our boutique labels, keep physical media alive.